The millionaire's baby refused to eat until the new maid saved his life. The Cortez mansion stood on the highest hill in the northern district of the city, where the lights of the night never went out, and luxury was built on money, power, and contracts that never slept. But behind those cold marble walls, something had been missing for a very long time: laughter. Alejandro Cortez, the most powerful real estate tycoon in the central region, stood silently in the endless hallway of his mansion. He was still wearing the expensive suit he had just returned in from a million-dollar meeting, yet his gray eyes no longer reflected ambition or victory. They were sunken, exhausted, and empty. He passed the large bedroom at the end of the corridor. The door was half open. Inside, a dim yellow light fell upon a small figure sitting motionless in a wheelchair made especially for children. It was Mateo, his son, 3 years old, the child who had once been his entire world. Mateo was frighteningly thin. His skin was pale like wax, his lips cracked and dry, his large eyes hollow as they stared into an undefined emptiness. On the small table in front of him sat a bowl of porridge that had long gone cold, its surface sealed by a thin film. No one had touched it. For 3 weeks now, Mateo had not eaten. Not because there was no food, not because there were no doctors. Alejandro had summoned all the top names, renowned pediatricians, child psychologists, nurses trained in Europe. They came, they examined him, they shook their heads, and they whispered among themselves in cold clinical terms: childhood depression, psychological trauma, loss of eating reflex. They said it was the aftermath of Sofia's death, his wife, Mateo's mother, the woman who had brought light into Alejandro's life, and then left suddenly in an accident he would never forgive himself for. From the day Sofia died, Mateo seemed to fade away with her. The little boy did not cry much. He did not scream. He did not throw tantrums. Mateo simply, slowly disappeared. Day after day, he closed his mouth, as if by not eating, not living, he might be able to follow his mother to some distant place beyond the cold mansion. Alejandro leaned against the wall, his hands clenched tight. He could buy an entire neighborhood with a single signature, could shake markets with a single decision. But before his 3-year-old son, who was withering away day by day, he was completely powerless. Money could not save his son, neither could power. And the most terrifying thought began to creep into Alejandro's mind. Did Mateo still want to remain in this world? In a world where Sofia was gone. In a world where his wealthy father did not know how to hold him the right way. Inside that vast mansion, among dozens of servants moving about each day, only one truth stood painfully clear. Mateo was slowly dying. And Alejandro Cortez did not know how to keep his son here. That morning began exactly like hundreds of other mornings inside the Cortez mansion, suffocatingly silent. The soft footsteps of the staff echoed faintly on the marble floors. The clink of spoons against bowls sounded dry and hollow, and not a single sound came from Mateo's room. Alejandro left the house very early, as usual. Remaining in the mansion at that hour were only the staff working in shifts, doing everything by procedure, by schedule, and no one truly dared to stay near the little boy sitting in the wheelchair for very long. Except Isabella. Isabella had arrived only 2 days earlier. She had no medical degree, was neither a nurse nor a professional nanny. In her hiring file, her position was simply listed as a part-time housekeeper. She came from a poor working-class district in the south of the city, more accustomed to caring for small children than polishing gleaming stone floors. That morning, Isabella was assigned to clean the kitchen. The Cortez kitchen was wide and cold, all white stone, stainless steel, and sharp LED lighting. It looked perfect, sterile, and completely unlike a place meant to nurture a child. Isabella was washing her hands when she heard the faint sound of wheelchair wheels behind her. She turned around, Matteo was there. He had been pushed into the kitchen by a nurse who placed him at the dining table and quickly left, as if afraid to let those empty eyes linger on her too long. In front of Matteo sat a bowl of mashed carrot porridge, still warm, but no one sat across from him. The boy looked at it, then turned away. Isabella stood still for a few seconds. She did not approach immediately. She simply sat down at Matteo's eye level, said nothing, forced nothing. She only observed. His eyes were tired, but not lifeless, as people assumed. Inside them lived a sorrow that was deep, old, and far too heavy for a 3-year-old child. Isabella swallowed hard. She took a spoon, scooped up a bit of porridge, and did not bring it straight to his mouth. Brrr! She softly made a strange sound. Matteo did not react. Isabella smiled, rotating her wrist as the spoon flew through the air like a tiny airplane. "The plane is preparing to land," she whispered, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "But it needs the pilot's permission." Matteo blinked, then blinked again. He looked at the spoon, not at the food, but at the movement, at the voice, at something different. Isabella continued, serious as if performing the most important mission of her life. "Preparing for emergency landing. Where is Pilot Matteo?" 1 second, 2 seconds. Then something no one expected happened. The corner of Matteo's mouth curved upward slightly. Not a full smile, just the smallest reflex, but enough for Isabella to notice. She brought the spoon a little closer. Matteo opened his mouth. Just a little, but it was open. The spoon touched his lips. The porridge entered his mouth. Matteo swallowed. No crying, no gagging, no spasms. Isabella barely dared to breathe. She continued. Airplane, pilot, landing. Matteo ate the second spoonful, then the third. And then the boy laughed. A soft, clear laugh rang out through the cold kitchen like a crack of light. At that very moment, the kitchen door opened. Alejandro Cortez stood frozen in the doorway. His leather briefcase slipped from his hand and struck the marble floor with a dry, echoing crash. But neither of them noticed. Alejandro saw only one thing. His son was laughing, and he was eating. His heart pounded painfully in his chest. 100 questions surged at once, but the only words that came out, hoarse, barely sounding like his own voice, were, "What? Did you give him to eat?" Isabella startled and turned around. She awkwardly set the spoon down, hiding her hands behind her apron like a child caught in the act. "Just carrot porridge, sir." Alejandro stepped forward. His eyes were cold and sharp like blades. "Did you put anything into it?" Isabella looked up. Her eyes did not avoid his. "No, sir," she said slowly. "I only added a little bit of play." Alejandro froze. Isabella looked at Matteo, then at the powerful man before her, and said something no one in that mansion had ever dared to say. "Matteo is not sick in his stomach, Mr. Cortez. He is sad." Isabella's words fell into the kitchen like a stone thrown onto the surface of a still lake. Matteo was sad. Alejandro Cortez stood motionless. In his world, every problem had a clear cause and a concrete solution. If it was an illness, there would be medicine. If it was a system error, there would be money. But how did one cure sad? He had no spreadsheet for that. "Do you think you know more than the doctors?" Alejandro asked, his voice lowered, no longer sharp, but still guarded. Isabella did not answer right away. She bent down and gently wiped Matteo's mouth with a soft cloth, slow and careful, as if the child were something incredibly fragile. "No, sir," she said. "I only see a child who has lost his mother, and who has never been allowed to be sad properly." Alejandro tightened his grip on the handle of his briefcase. By now, Matteo had eaten nearly half the bowl of porridge. He was no longer smiling widely, but his eyes were no longer empty. He watched Isabella closely, as if afraid that if he looked away, she might disappear. "What did you do differently from the others?" Alejandro asked, his voice dropping further. Isabella took a soft breath. "I did not force him to eat. I did not try to treat him." She lifted her head and looked straight at Alejandro. "I only stayed beside him." Alejandro remained silent. Isabella continued, her voice steady, not lecturing, not blaming. "Before feeding Mateo, I sat on the floor playing building blocks with him for nearly 2 hours. I did not ask, I did not demand. I was simply there. When he felt safe, hunger came on its own." Something seemed to tighten in Alejandro's chest. 2 hours, 2 hours of building blocks. He could not remember the last time he had sat on the floor with his son. Perhaps never. "Show me," Alejandro said, almost like an order. Isabella nodded. She scooped another spoonful of porridge and returned to her cheerful tone. "The airplane is preparing to take off again. Is Pilot Mateo ready?" Alejandro held his breath. Mateo glanced briefly at his father. His eyes flinched slightly, an unconscious reflex. Then he turned back to Isabella and opened his mouth. The spoon was offered again. Mateo swallowed. Alejandro felt his knees weaken. He had to brace his hand on the kitchen counter to remain standing. Thousands of meeting hours, hundreds of contracts, decades of corporate battles. Nothing had ever left him as shaken as this moment. His son chose her. When Isabella lifted Mateo to wipe his hands, Alejandro stepped forward. "Let me," he said, reaching out his hands. In an instant, Mateo's small body stiffened. He recoiled, his lips trembling. A soft sob escaped, not loud, but filled with fear. Alejandro froze. Isabella intervened immediately. "It's okay, Mateo," she said gently, holding the boy close to her chest. "Uncle Alejandro is just standing here." Mateo slowly calmed down, resting his head on Isabella's shoulder. Alejandro stepped back as if he had just been struck by a painful slap. His son was afraid of him. In that moment, something inside Alejandro Cortez cracked, not with a loud sound, but with a deep, silent fracture. "What do you want in order to stay?" Alejandro asked hoarsely. Isabella looked up, surprised. "Sir?" "I want you to take care of Mateo," Alejandro said slowly. "Only you. I will pay you 3 times your current salary." Isabella was silent for a few seconds. Then she gently shook her head. "I agree," she said, "but on my terms." Alejandro frowned. No one had ever placed conditions on him. "I decide how to care for him," Isabella said clearly. "No locking him in his room, no forcing him to eat, no frightening him." Alejandro looked at his son, now dozing on Isabella's shoulder, his breathing calm and even. Then he nodded. In that moment, Alejandro Cortez did not sign a contract. He placed his first true trust in a complete stranger. The fragile peace Isabella brought to the Cortez mansion lasted only 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, the sharp, decisive sound of high heels echoed through the vast entrance hall, slicing through the air that had grown accustomed to silence. The staff bowed mechanically, as if their survival instincts told them that this woman was nothing like Isabella. Camila Rojas had returned. She walked into the mansion as though it already belonged to her. A cream-colored silk dress clung to her flawless figure, her glossy black hair perfectly styled, and every step radiated absolute control. Camila did not need to ask. She knew exactly who she was in this house. Alejandro Cortez's fiancée, the perfect woman in the eyes of high society. Isabella was sitting on the floor of the family room, playing with building blocks with Mateo. He seemed better today, able to sit up straight on his own, his thin hands more agile than before. When the sound of high heels reached him, Mateo froze. He lifted his head. and his entire small body instantly went rigid. Isabella sensed it immediately. Matteo dropped the wooden block in his hand, clutched the hem of her blouse with both hands, his nails digging into the fabric until they turned white. Camilla stopped a few steps away, her eyes sliding past Isabella as if over an unimportant piece of furniture. Then she looked at Matteo. "Are you still in that chair?" Camilla said, her voice sweetly cold. "Didn't Alejandro tell you? Children shouldn't get used to being held too much. It spoils them." She stepped forward, just one step. Matteo let out a very small sound, almost a whimper. He recoiled, his whole body trembling. Isabella immediately wrapped her arms around him, shielding him instinctively. "He's playing," Isabella said, keeping her voice calm. Camilla raised an eyebrow. "And who are you?" "I'm Isabella," she replied, "Matteo's caregiver." Camilla let out a soft laugh, a smile that did not reach her eyes. "A caregiver? Ah, another one." She bent down and reached a hand toward Matteo. "Come here, Matteo. Say hello to your future mother." Matteo screamed, not a spoiled child's cry, but a sharp, short, panicked scream. He buried his face in Isabella's neck, trembling like a small animal cornered by a predator. Isabella stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry, Miss Camilla," Isabella said firmly. "He is not ready." Camilla straightened, her gaze turning cold. "Are you teaching me how to behave with my fiancé's son?" Just then, Alejandro entered the room. Camilla instantly changed. Her smile returned, soft and perfect. "Alejandro, you're home. I'm so worried about Matteo. He looks weaker than the other day." Alejandro looked at his son, trembling in Isabella's arms. His eyes darkened. "He's fine," he said curtly. "Isabella is taking care of him." Camilla paused, just for the smallest fraction of a second. Then she smiled again. "Is that so? I hope this young woman knows what she's doing." That evening, while helping Matteo bathe, Isabella discovered something that made her heart tighten. On the boy's fragile skin, beneath his ribs, and on the inside of his arms, were bruises. Not large, but distinct. The marks of fingers, not from falling, not from bumping into something. Matteo lowered his head, both arms hugging his chest. "Does it hurt?" Isabella asked softly, lightly touching one of the bruises. Matteo nodded. Then he whispered, his voice trembling, "The witch!" Isabella froze. "Which witch?" she asked. Matteo did not answer, but the way his eyes drifted toward the bedroom door said everything. That night, Isabella sat for a long time beside Matteo's bed, watching him sleep restlessly, occasionally jerking awake, breathing fast. A cold feeling rose inside her. This was not just a child who was sad because he had lost his mother. This was a child, living in fear. And Isabella realized something terrifying. The true danger in this mansion was not illness. It wore a beautiful face. And it was named Camila Rojas. In the days that followed, the Cortez mansion began to change, very slowly, but undeniably, not through furniture or decor, but through the very rhythm of its breath. In the mornings, Isabella drew back the curtains in Matteo's room a little earlier. Sunlight poured into the room that had once always remained closed. Matteo squinted at first, uncomfortable, then gradually grew used to it. He no longer turned his face toward the wall as he used to. Isabella took Matteo into the back garden of the mansion. It was a place that had been forgotten since Sophia's death. The grass was trimmed regularly, but there were no children's footprints. Matteo placed his feet on the ground, startled, then let out a soft laugh as he felt the cool, tender grass beneath him. He sat down, then leaned against Isabella. For the first time in months, Matteo stayed outside his room for more than 15 minutes. Alejandro stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down. He did not work. He did not answer calls. He simply stood there, watching his son beneath the sunlight, the very thing Camilla had once called not good for children's skin. Matteo smiled, not widely, but genuinely. Something warmed inside Alejandro's chest, and at the same time, an uncomfortable question began to form in his mind. Why did Camilla always want the boy to stay in his room? That afternoon, Camilla appeared in the garden. She stood beneath the shade, wearing large sunglasses, watching Isabella help Matteo practice standing. Camilla's gaze darkened. "What are you doing?" Camilla asked, her voice low but sharp. "Helping him move," Isabella replied, without turning back. "The doctor said he needs sunlight and space." Camilla stepped forward, her heels sinking into the green grass like a cut. "I don't care what the doctor said. In this house there are rules." She bent down to Matteo's level. "You should stay in your room. Don't put on this display. It's unpleasant." Matteo began breathing rapidly. His hands trembled, clutching Isabella's dress. "Please don't speak like that in front of him," Isabella said, calm but firm. "He understands everything." Camilla removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were cold and sharp like blades. "Who do you think you are?" Camilla whispered. "You are only temporary. Don't forget that." She leaned closer, close enough for only Isabella to hear. "The boy is a burden, and burdens are eventually abandoned." Isabella felt her blood turn cold. "Be careful with your words," Isabella replied slowly. "If Mr. Cortez sees what I see, the one who will leave this house will not be me." Camilla froze for a heartbeat. Then she curved a thin smile. Just then, the glass door on the balcony slid open. "Is everything all right?" Alejandro called down. Camilla immediately turned, her voice softening. "Nothing, my love. I was just reminding Isabella to apply sunscreen on Matteo." Alejandro nodded and went back inside. The smile on Camilla's lips vanished instantly. "We're not finished," she murmured, then turned away. That evening, while bathing Matteo, Isabella again noticed the old bruises. But today, Matteo reached out and took her hand himself. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Of whom?" Isabella asked, her heart tightening. Matteo lowered his head. "The witch says I must not tell." Isabella pulled him into a tight embrace. In that moment, she understood that she was no longer just a housekeeper. She was standing on a dangerous line. On one side was the truth. On the other was a woman willing to do anything to protect her perfect image. And Isabella knew, if she did not act carefully, Matteo would not get a second chance. The party was scheduled for Saturday night. Alejandro called it an intimate gathering, but everyone understood what it really was: a declaration. He wanted his partners, high society, and even the vicious whispers to see that his son was not a dying child. Isabella knew it, and she also understood how heavy the pressure on her shoulders truly was. From early morning she stayed in the kitchen. She did not let anyone help. She did not allow anyone to touch Matteo's food. She chose every apple, every pear, peeled them carefully, steamed them, then mashed them by hand to feel their smoothness. No sugar, no seasoning, nothing unnecessary. It was not just a meal. It was Matteo's life. At 6 in the evening, the Cortez mansion began to transform. Crystal chandeliers lit up. Crystal glasses clinked. Polite laughter filled the entrance hall that was usually cold and silent. Matteo was dressed by Isabella in a neat dark blue outfit. The boy was no longer as frightened as before, but his hand still clutched her clothes tightly. "Will you eat?" Isabella whispered. Matteo nodded. "Airplane?" Isabella smiled, her heart tightening with emotion. At that moment, Camilla appeared at the kitchen doorway. She wore a deep red, form-fitting dress. Her red lips curved into a perfect smile. "Alejandro is looking for you," Camilla said. "There's a problem in the laundry room. Wine was spilled on the tablecloth. He will be very unhappy if the banquet table isn't perfect." Isabella hesitated. "I can't leave Matteo right now." Camilla laughed softly. I'm here. Do you think I would poison my own son in front of 30 people? Isabella's reason fought violently with her instinct, but the chaos in the kitchen, the constant flow of people, and the pressure of time forced her to nod. "I'll be right back," Isabella said, placing the bowl on the table. She left, and the moment the door closed behind Isabella, Camilla's smile vanished. She pulled from her small purse an unlabeled glass vial. Her hand did not shake. 5 drops of clear liquid fell into the bowl. Camilla stirred it thoroughly with a clean spoon and placed it back exactly where it had been. "Let's see how you save him this time," she whispered. 2 minutes later, Isabella returned. She glanced quickly at the bowl. No strange smell, no change in color, no time to start over. The party began. Alejandro led Mateo and Isabella into the entrance hall. All eyes turned toward them. Alejandro placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice full of pride. "This is my son, Mateo," he said, "and this is the woman who helped him recover." Polite applause followed. Isabella knelt before Mateo. "The airplane is taking off." Mateo ate the first spoonful. Alejandro smiled. The second spoonful. Mateo slowed slightly. The third spoonful. The boy's face turned pale. Mateo clutched his stomach. A small groan escaped his lips. Then suddenly, he vomited violently. The horrifying sound exploded through the luxurious hall. Porridge splattered across his small outfit, Isabella's dress, and Alejandro's expensive leather shoes. Screams, whispers, sounds of disgust. Mateo convulsed, screaming in pain. Alejandro dropped to his knees in panic. "Mateo, what's wrong, son?" "Oh my God!" Camilla cried out, her voice trembling dramatically. "What did she do to my child?" Isabella stood frozen. "No, it can't be. He was fine just moments ago." Camilla rushed forward, pushing Isabella aside. "Get away!" Alejandro whirled around, his eyes bloodshot. "What did you tell me? You said you knew how to care for him." "Mr. Cortez, I swear—" "She's the only one who touched the food," Camilla cut in. "She poisoned him." The crowd murmured. Before Isabella could react, Camilla bent down, slipped her hand into Isabella's apron pocket, and pulled out a glass vial. "What is this?" Isabella went pale. "I've never seen it before." Camilla opened it and sniffed. "Chemicals. Oh my God, Alejandro. It's homemade sedative." Alejandro held his convulsing son, fear crushing his reason. "Don't touch him again," he roared at Isabella. "You lied to me." 2 security guards approached. Isabella was dragged down onto the cold marble floor. Every gaze avoided her like a disease. "Call the police," Alejandro said hoarsely. "Lock her up." Mateo, in pain, reached toward Isabella. "Isa!" Alejandro turned away. Camilla placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle. "Let me take him to the hospital. You shouldn't have to see this." Alejandro nodded. Isabella was dragged away, Mateo's cries echoing behind her. In that moment, Isabella understood something painfully clear. Camilla had won a perfect round, and Isabella had just been pushed into the deepest pit of hell. The service storage room door slammed shut behind Isabella. Darkness swallowed her. No windows, no phone. Only the sharp stench of chemicals and the damp cold seeping into her skin. Isabella slid down to the floor, her heart pounding violently, Mateo's heart-rending cries still echoing in her ears. She closed her eyes, not to cry, but to think. Camilla had calculated everything too perfectly, too fast, too precisely. But there was one thing Camilla did not know. The kitchen. Isabella remembered clearly. On her first day here, she had overheard Alejandro boasting to the head of security about the new camera system. 360-degree coverage, with audio, 7-day storage. She had not paid attention then, until now. If the cameras were still there, Then the truth was still there. Isabella sprang to her feet and pounded on the door. "Open the door! Check the kitchen cameras! Camila put something into the food!" No one answered. Upstairs, Alejandro was standing in the mansion's private security room. Mateo had already been rushed away for emergency care, but panic still clenched his chest. Isabella's words, her frightened eyes, and Mateo's reaction. None of it fit. Alejandro stared at the monitors before him. 6 camera feeds glowed on the screen. His hand trembled slightly as he entered the password. Kitchen camera, the moments before the party. The image appeared, sharp and clear. Isabella was mashing fruit. Camila appeared. The two spoke. Isabella left. Then, Camila's smile vanished on screen. Alejandro held his breath. He watched Camila pull a glass vial from her purse. He saw each drop of clear liquid fall into his son's food. He clearly heard the chilling whisper, "Let's see how you save him this time." Alejandro's blood seemed to freeze. "No," he whispered. The truth lay exposed, brutal, undeniable. Alejandro stumbled back a step, nausea surging violently. The woman he was about to marry had poisoned his son. And now she was alone, taking the boy to the hospital. Alejandro bolted out of the security room, sprinting down to the basement. The storage room door flew open. Isabella stood there, her eyes red but clear. "You've seen the cameras," she said firmly, not a question. Alejandro nodded. His voice was hoarse. "You were right." Isabella did not sigh in relief. Instead, her face went pale. "Then it's worse," she said quickly. "Camila will not take Mateo to a real hospital." Alejandro froze. "What do you mean?" "If she goes to a hospital," Isabella said, each word falling heavily, "doctors will run tests. They will find the substance that caused the vomiting. Camila would never allow that to happen." Alejandro felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. "Her goal is not to save Mateo," Isabella continued. "It's to control the story." "The mountain cabin," Alejandro blurted. "My family's old house. No cell signal. Far from any hospital." Isabella looked straight at him. "Then we have no time left." The rain came down almost the moment Alejandro and Isabella burst out of the mansion. Not a light drizzle, but heavy, pounding rain, thick and relentless, as if the entire sky were pouring its fury onto the winding mountain road. The headlights of Alejandro's sports car cut a weak white path through the wall of water. Isabella gripped the door handle tightly, her heart racing. "How long has she been ahead of us?" she asked. "No more than 15 minutes," Alejandro replied, his eyes never leaving the road. "Camila's car isn't powerful. In rain like this, she won't dare to drive fast." But inside, his fear did not ease. Did not. Mateo was in the hands of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The road narrowed. On one side rose a cliff wall. On the other yawned a dark abyss swallowed by night. Wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying a biting chill. The car slid slightly over the freshly formed mud, making Isabella hold her breath. The rain grew heavier. Thunder roared, tearing across the sky. The road to the old mountain cabin appeared, a rusted iron gate hanging half open. Alejandro slammed on the brakes. The car skidded forward, then stopped before the dark, weathered cabin, crouched at the edge of the mountain like a ghost. "Mateo!" Alejandro shouted, pounding on the wooden door. "Open up, Camila!" There was no answer, only the wind screaming through the cracks and rain hammering the decayed roof. Isabella pressed her ear to the door. She heard very faint crying. "He's alive," she said quickly. "But not well. We must get inside now." Alejandro stepped back, gathered his strength, and kicked hard. The wooden door burst open. At that exact moment, lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the scene inside the cabin. Mateo lay on an old table in the center of the room, his face deathly pale. Camila stood beside him, her hand trembling as she clutched a phone and a stack of papers. "Stop!" Alejandro roared. Camilla spun around. Her eyes were bloodshot, crazed. "It's too late," she rasped with a hoarse laugh. She dragged Mateo toward the wooden railing behind the cabin, where just one more step would mean falling straight into a gorge dozens of meters deep. "An accident," Camilla said, her voice turning disturbingly gentle. "A tragic accident. A sick child, panicked, falling off the mountain. How pitiful." Mateo sobbed. "Papa?" Alejandro stood frozen. "Camila, please, I'll give you anything you want." Camila laughed loudly. "Too late. I don't need you anymore." Isabella, who had been standing behind them, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait!" she called out, her voice rising above the rain and thunder. Camilla turned. Isabella walked slowly, raising both hands. "Let the child go. I will go with you." Alejandro spun around. "Isabella, no—" "Be quiet," Isabella said without taking her eyes off Camilla. "You want control of the situation. Mateo is too weak. He could die before you stage your perfect accident." Camilla narrowed her eyes. Isabella continued, her voice calm but steel hard. "I'm strong. I can go with you, be your hostage, guarantee your safe escape." A deadly silence followed. Then Camilla laughed. "You're right," she nodded. "The boy is indeed a nuisance." Camilla shoved Mateo toward the railing. Alejandro screamed. "No!" Isabella lunged forward. "Don't!" Camilla stared straight at Isabella, her smile twisted. "Catch him!" And she let go. Time seemed to freeze. Mateo's small body fell. Without thinking, without hesitation, Isabella hurled herself forward on instinct, throwing her whole body out. A brutal impact. Mateo crashed into Isabella's chest. Both of them slammed down onto the wooden floor right at the cliff's edge. Isabella took the full force of the fall, her back and head striking the hard surface. A dry, cracking sound rang out. Isabella lay motionless. Mateo lay on her chest, screaming, but alive. Alejandro rushed forward and dropped to his knees. "Mateo! Isabella!" Isabella coughed violently, blood spilling from the corner of her mouth, but her arms were still tightly wrapped around the boy. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Mateo sobbed and nodded. I'm alive." Isabella gave a faint smile. Then her eyes slowly closed. In the howling rain atop the mountain, a child was saved, at the cost of the sacrifice of the only person who dared to leap into the abyss for him. The rain hammered wildly against the roof of the old wooden cabin, as if trying to tear the mountain apart. Alejandro collapsed to his knees beside Isabella and Mateo. His hands shook so badly he could not hold them both at once. Mateo sobbed, his small body trembling with fear, but he was alive. And Isabella, her body was growing colder in his arms. "Isabella, look at me," Alejandro repeated, his voice breaking. "Don't sleep, please." There was no answer, only the rain, the wind, and Isabella's ragged, labored breathing. Behind them, Camilla stood frozen for a few seconds. This was not how she had imagined it, not the neat ending of a staged accident, not a child disappearing forever. Instead, a woman lay motionless, blood spreading across the wooden floor, still clutching the child tightly in her arms. "No, this isn't how it was supposed to be," Camilla murmured, stepping back. Alejandro lifted his head. His eyes were no longer those of a businessman or a panicked father. They were the eyes of a beast driven into a corner. "What did you do?" he roared. Camilla turned to run, but the wet wooden floor was slick. She slipped and crashed down. Before she could get up, Alejandro had already lunged forward, pinning her to the floor with his full weight. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice dark and terrifyingly calm. Camilla struggled, screaming in the rain. "Let me go! You don't know who I am! I just—" "Shut up!" Alejandro snapped. If Isabella dies, you will spend the rest of your life paying for it." He bound Camilla's wrists with an old rope hanging on the wall, dragged her aside, and called the police. Then he rushed back to Isabella and Matteo. Matteo was still crying, but when he saw his father, he clutched Alejandro's shirt tightly. "Papa, Isa is sleeping." Alejandro lifted Isabella and took Matteo's hand, rushing to the car. The car shot down the mountain like an arrow, headlights piercing through the heavy curtain of rain. The road was slick, the turns sharp, but Alejandro did not slow down. One hand gripped the steering wheel, the other pressed a cloth tightly against Isabella's bleeding wound. "Isabella, don't give up," he repeated, like a prayer. "You can't give up. I haven't even had the chance to say I'm sorry." Isabella let out a faint moan, a tiny sound, but enough to make Alejandro nearly cry. "Can you hear me?" he asked urgently. "Matteo is fine. He survived." Isabella's eyelids fluttered slightly, but did not open. The car skidded lightly around a dangerous curve, nearly losing control. Alejandro clenched his teeth and corrected the wheel. Cold sweat soaked his forehead, mixing with rain splashing through the windows. Finally, the city lights appeared in the distance, blurred but shining like a fragile promise. "We're almost there," Alejandro whispered, not knowing whether he was speaking to Isabella or to himself. At the central hospital, emergency lights flashed as the car screeched to a stop at the entrance. Alejandro jumped out, shouting for doctors. Nurses rushed over, quickly lifting Isabella onto a gurney. "Severe trauma," one doctor said rapidly. "Possible rib fractures, head injury." Matteo was pulled aside for examination, but the boy struggled, screaming, "No! I want to stay with Isa!" Alejandro hugged his son tightly, his voice trembling. "She needs doctors, Matteo. She needs to live." The emergency room doors closed. Alejandro stood motionless outside, rain dripping from his hair onto the cold hospital floor. He felt hollow, as if everything most important in his life had just been placed on a scale between life and death. Somewhere, far up on the mountain, the wail of police sirens echoed. Camilla had been arrested, but Alejandro no longer cared. In that moment, he had only one thing left to pray for, that the woman who had leapt into the abyss for his son would not be taken from this world. At last, the emergency room doors opened. Alejandro sprang to his feet. His entire body went rigid. A doctor stepped out, removing his mask. His face looked exhausted and grave. "Mr. Cortez?" the doctor asked. Alejandro nodded. "How is she?" The doctor let out a long breath. "We've stopped the bleeding and stabilized her main injuries. She has broken ribs, a head injury, and mild lung contusions. Her condition is very serious, but she made it through surgery." Alejandro nearly collapsed. He had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. "She's alive?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "She is alive," the doctor confirmed. "But she's still in a coma. The next 48 hours are critical." Matteo stirred at the noise. Seeing the doctor, the boy immediately sat up in his father's arms. "Is Isa alive?" he asked anxiously. The doctor bent down and smiled gently. "She's alive, little one, but she needs your help." Matteo blinked. "How can I help?" "She can hear you," the doctor said. "Sometimes people who are sleeping very deeply need to hear a familiar voice to find their way back." Matteo turned to Alejandro, his small face filled with innocent determination. "Papa, let me see Isa." Alejandro hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Inside the recovery room, Isabella lay motionless amid IV lines and monitors. Her face was pale, her forehead wrapped in white bandages. The strong, resilient young woman was gone. In her place lay a fragile body, fighting at the edge between life and death. Matteo stepped forward, lifted by Alejandro so he could reach the bed. He took Isabella's finger. His tiny hand trembled. "Isa," Mateo whispered. "I'm hungry. Where is the airplane?" Isa's finger twitched, just a tiny movement, almost imperceptible unless one was watching closely. But to Alejandro, that moment was like a bolt of lightning tearing through the darkness that had lasted for days. "Isa," he whispered, his voice trembling. Mateo's eyes widened. He did not dare breathe too loudly, afraid that even the smallest sound might shatter the miracle. His small hands continued to hold Isa's, warm and persistent. "Isa," Mateo whispered close to her ear. "I'm here." Isa's eyelashes fluttered. Then, very slowly, very laboriously, her eyes opened. Her gaze was unfocused, lost, like someone rising from the depths of a dark sea. She blinked several times, trying to focus, trying to understand where she was. A white ceiling, soft lights, the smell of disinfectant. And then a familiar face came into view. Mateo. "You," Isa whispered. Her throat burned with dryness. "Are you okay?" Mateo burst into tears. He leaned forward, gently wrapping his arms around Isa's neck, afraid of hurting her. "I'm okay. Isa woke up. Papa, Isa woke up." Alejandro stood frozen. That woman, the one he had once doubted, humiliated and driven out of his son's life, now lay there, weak but alive, and the very first thing she worried about after her coma was Mateo. Alejandro stepped forward and stood beside the hospital bed. He opened his mouth, then had to take a deep breath before he could speak. "You saved my son," he said hoarsely. "You owe me nothing, but I owe you his life." Isa looked at him, her eyes still tired, but strangely clear. "Mateo is alive," she said softly. "That is enough." Those simple words made Alejandro break down in tears. 3 months later, the Cortez mansion was no longer a cold place of marble and silent hallways. Curtains were drawn open every morning. Sunlight flooded the living room. Toys lay scattered at the foot of the stairs. Mateo's laughter rang through the garden, crisp, alive, no longer fragile and broken as before. Isabella recovered slowly but steadily. The wounds on her body gradually healed, but there were scars she knew would remain for a long time. Memories of the rainy night, the fall, the moment she chose to throw herself forward without thinking. And Camila Montoya was sentenced on a light rainy morning. No more silk dresses, no more red lipstick, no more proud, commanding gaze. The woman who once entered the Cortez mansion like a queen now lowered her head before the judge, sentenced for crimes that could not be denied. When the prison door closed, no one in the Cortez family ever spoke her name again, as if a darkness had been shut away behind them. One afternoon, Isabella carefully folded the last set of clothes into a small suitcase. Alejandro stood in the doorway, silently watching. He knew this moment would come. "I think I should go," Isabella said softly. "Mateo is better now, and you've become a real father." Alejandro was silent for a few seconds. Then he stepped forward, not to stop the suitcase, not to take her hand. "I once lost my wife," he said, "and nearly lost my son. I cannot lose one more person just because I'm afraid I don't deserve her." He took out a small, simple box, plain, without ornament. "Isabella," Alejandro said slowly, "I don't need a perfect person. I need the one who dared to sacrifice herself for my son, and who taught me how to love again from the beginning." Isabella choked up. Mateo ran out from his room, holding the familiar spoon in his hand. "Where is Isa going?" he asked. Isabella knelt down, but before she could answer, Mateo raised the spoon. "The airplane is taking off," he said seriously. "Isa cannot go?" Isabella laughed through her tears. She looked at Alejandro, then she nodded. That evening, in a kitchen filled with warm light, Mateo giggled as the airplane flew in. Alejandro made clumsy engine noises. Isabella stood beside them, her hand resting gently on the shoulders of father and son. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. This family was not born from blood, it was born from pain, from choice, and from love brave enough to stay.